Bora Boye. Some years ago when I was in the corporate environment, I had to do some research basically on leadership problems, right? What are the problems that the top CEOs of Fortune 500 companies have, right? And in the process, one of the things that really surprised me was the fact that a good percentage of these very successful high-end CEOs is that they struggle with feelings of inadequacy, of self-doubt, of what they call the imposter syndrome, right? Do I really deserve to be here? Am I really equipped to do this job? Do I have what it takes? And they become heroes precisely because they have all those feelings, which are common to everybody, but they find a way to transcend those feelings in spite of having these real strong, sometimes crippling doubts. They're able to figure out a way to go forward. And I found that really fascinating for a couple of reasons. On one side, it's just surprising to see that these people who we would portray as being just heroic and courageous, they actually have these real strong frailties. But the other piece is understanding why they have that. Part of the reason why they feel that way is because they're always going forward, right? They're always going forward. And this is the key about going forward, about progress, about improvement, okay? Change creates fear. Change creates uncertainty. Change creates anxiety. Change creates disruption and interruption of our regularly scheduled broadcast, right? When you change things, by definition, that means that your keys aren't where you left them. You don't hang your hat on the left side, you hang it on the right side. You don't turn a right on Main Street anymore, you turn left on Main Street. Like all of these things represent change, and those stress people out, especially if you got a lot of change all at once, or if you've just got really significant change, something that you really are accustomed to. Ifa says you can't drink alcohol anymore, and you drink a beer every day after work, or you drink a glass of wine every day after work. Ifa says you can't drink alcohol. That's one very significant change, okay? And we don't like change because we don't like the interruption. But there can be no improvement without change. You cannot get better unless you do things differently. Okay? So that's the ongoing battle. So when I think about these folks who are these high-end CEOs, part of the reason that they're constantly feeling this intense anxiety is because they're embracing that change. They're forcing the change. And so their environment is constantly shifting, and they're always in this uncertain kind of a space where they don't quite know what's going to happen next because this may not have been done before. Okay. Now this is the School of Orisha Studies, and I'm your instructor, Obafemi Origunwa. Today I want to talk about change. I want to talk about the relationship between change and improvement, and why Ifa in particular is so instrumental in facilitating change, transformation, improvement, elevation to the point of self mastery and perfection. All right. When we look at what Ifa teaches and how Ifa is practiced, Ifa is going to give you some really basic parameters. You go to consult, and there's certain things that Ifa is going to say that are built in. One, Ifa is going to say sacrifice. That's a guarantee. You always sacrifice. If the message is positive, if the message is negative, you sacrifice. That's one thing. That represents a certain amount of change, right? Because at the core level, a sacrifice means that you give up something that you have for something that is a better potential on the horizon, right? So it's like a calculated risk. I'm gonna decide to give up certain things so that they can serve as an investment in something that will pay off and yield somewhere down the line, either in my relationship or my financial situation or with my my sense of connection to certain kinds of forces, to my ancestors, to an orisha, to my ori, etc. I'm willing to give up certain things because there's something that's gonna there's something in it for me, something that's more valuable than what I'm giving up. The trick is once you start to see that change manifest, then there's all the lifestyle changes, right? And that's part of where Ifa will give you taboos. Okay? So the taboos assume that if you refrain from doing certain things over time, okay, or if you start to implement certain behaviors over time, as the effects of the sacrifice start to manifest, your behavior and your transformation will intersect with the opportunity that you seek, and boom, you're gonna, then that's where you realize the fullness of your sacrifice and the fullness of your behavior modification. All right, those are built into the framework of Ifa. Most people, probably nobody, really is teaching you that this is what's going on behind the scenes when you consult Ifa. But this is what's going on behind the scenes when you consult Ifa. It's not just magic. It's not just these mystical, esoteric things that take place. That's a huge part of it because you don't know how it all works together. You don't know how Ifa was able to, predict and anticipate that this combination of activities would have such an impact on all of your environment, right? That part is definitely esoteric. It's beyond our comprehension. But the part that we can understand is what we observe in the process. And this is what I want to share with you right now. This is what I've observed in the process after consulting Ifa over and over and over and over for people in every kind of a situation. People who have problems with their health, people who have problems with their money, people who have problems with their relationship, people who have problems with their children, people who have problems with their own sense of identity and direction. Ifa is going to bring it to these two variables every single time. It's very fascinating. You see, man, Ifa's got a simple solution. It looks different for everybody, but on one hand, Ifa's going to say sacrifice. On the other hand, Ifa is going to give this person observances, commonly called taboos. Where those two converge, this is where transformation takes place. But behind the scenes, what's happening is that you, the devotee, you, the practitioner, you are the one who has to be aware. Okay? Because at every step, after you've made your sacrifice and you're keeping your observances, you're not eating certain foods, or you're not wearing certain colors, or you're not going certain places, you're in a perpetual state of anxiety. You're not quite clear, well, when is this all going to come together? What's it going to look like? I don't even know what I'm really quite looking for, right? I just know that I was asked to do these things and not do these things for, 60 days, 90 days, or for the rest of my life. I don't quite understand why, though. So you're anxious. And it's in that point of anxiety and uncertainty that you're going to be like those CEOs. You're going to be most tempted to revert back to something that's comfortable. You're gonna be tempted to revert back to something that's familiar. You're gonna reach a difficult situation, something unexpected happens, and you'll be so tempted to go back to doing business as usual because that's what you know. That's what you've been conditioned to do over years and maybe decades. Okay? And this is where guidance, mentorship, and instruction becomes so important. Because my job as your advisor, as your instructor, as your mentor, as your guide, my job is, on one hand, just to help remind you, hey, do you remember why you were going for that in the very beginning? You remember what brought you to this place? Do you remember the circumstances and the situation that you were living? Remember how it felt? Remember the way you were thinking every single day? Okay? you got to recall what was driving you. You got to stay hungry. You got to stay in touch with that real irresistible sense of urgency that says what I was doing before just wasn't sustainable. I couldn't do that anymore. Okay? I didn't have any reason to deceive myself into thinking that this is going to keep working. I had to do something different. That I remember that feeling. I remember those ideas that this just cannot continue. Right? So part of my job is to help remind you there was something in you that was driving you forward, that was saying that this can't continue. All right? So another part of it is also helping to create the alternatives for you. And this is something that I really want to emphasize. It's very important for your ability to change and improve. You also have to have some kind of an alternative, right? So that's part of what I do also. I help you to identify, instead of just not eating a certain food, or instead of just not going to a certain place, instead of just not associating with certain people, you also will associate with this group of people, or you will practice this spiritual discipline instead of that. Instead of eating certain things, instead of eating meat, you're gonna eat beans and rice, right? But you're gonna season them up real well, right? I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna help you identify what is the other behavior, activity that you need to engage in that's going to be more consistent with where you're trying to go over time, right? Because once you've kept your sacrifice and you've made your observances, Ifa's work is done. It's up to you to stay focused. It's up to you to make the 10,000 decisions in between divination. It's up to you. You got to make those decisions. You got to keep that commitment. You've got to make those choices, right? But you would be wise to do that in concert with someone who is partnered with you in that. It would be best if you have somebody who's going to partner with you, who's going to say, okay, I'll be present with you in making those decisions. I'm going to help you and support you to make the decisions that are true, and true to what you really want to accomplish, consistent with your desired outcome. Okay? Which brings me to a third element of what it is that I do. What's my job? Not only do I help you remember what brought you to Ifa, help you remember that, yeah, the situation that you were in at that point was not sustainable, and that's why you wanted to consult Ifa and make the sacrifice in the first place. But it's also helping you to make a connection to your really, really, what you really want to accomplish. In addition to just solving the problem, in addition to creating relief for yourself, okay, yeah, that's one thing. But ultimately, what do you really want to do? What do you really want to accomplish? Once all those problems were solved and you had the money that you need, or you had the relationship that you need, or you had the connection with the ancestors that you need, okay, now what? What does that add up to for you? What would you do once you had all of those things in place? That is the real kernel. That's the real opportunity. That's the gold right there. What you really know is possible for you. If you didn't have these limiting factors, or if they weren't as limiting, what would you do? Where would you show up? How would you show up? Who would you serve? Who would you serve? And if once we make that connection and you sincerely embrace and accept within yourself that this is what you really were born to do, this is how you were really born to show up, this is who you really belong with, this is where you really, really are going to shine, this is where you get your greatest joy, this is where you have the greatest impact. When you make that connection and you accept that about yourself, now you're free. Now you're free. All the other elements of change become so much smaller. Those difficulties become so much smaller. They become so, you know what I mean? Just they fade, right? They fade. And again, this is how you become that kind of a heroic person, because you can endure any of the anxieties and the fears with the full understanding that you are working toward the fulfillment of your destiny. All right? And so this is what we do in the School of Orisha Studies. This is what we do in the Orisha Lifestyle Academy. When you read all of my books, when you follow any of my material on social media, if it's videos, if it's blog posts, if it's Facebook or Instagram, and you really look and you read into what I'm saying, this is what it all boils down to. Right? Everything that you do within Orisha Lifestyle is conspiring in favor of self-discovery, self-mastery, and sacred service. Okay? Once you adopt that framework, that mindset, that understanding, you become free. You become free. All right? So I hope that in your quest for change and improvement, you will seek out a pathway and a methodology that is based on revealing your real truth and not, tying you up in spiritual materialism and superficial, you know, moving of chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Make really meaningful change, not superficial change. That's what I mean. All right. Abora aboye, aboshishe.